George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
There was no stuttering in the King's speech. It was a seamless transition from one cheek to the other cheek of the same uni-party backside. Backslapping and buttock slapping was the order of the day. And the US Secret Service, it turns out, cannot operate on sloping roofs. Are there any other kind of roofs? Because that's why there was no Secret Service guard on the roof that Mr. Crooks, aged 20, with no social media profile of any kind, was able to come within a whisker, within a blonde strand of wig, of striking the head of the next president of the United States. Was it an inside job? Was there another gunman on the water tower? From the grassy knoll to the water tower? Is this November 1963 revisited? And the Palestinian people were not greatly cheered by the sight of the new British Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, the Eddie Amin of British politics, shaking the blood-soaked hand of the demon Benjamin Netanyahu, especially when they learned that the new British government is exactly like the old British government, blocking arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night because this is the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Was the Trump shooting a deep state inside job, asks our poll this evening. That's up there with is the Pope a Catholic and do bears defecate in the woods? It's such an obvious thing that either the US Secret Service, at least in Pennsylvania, are the Keystone Cops. They couldn't shoot the inside of a barn door. The men and women of the presidential detail made such a hash of protecting Donald Trump that you have to conclude they were in on the crime. The only alternative would be that they'd been appointed to their positions in a box-ticking exercise, were not up to the job, shouldn't have been placed in charge of anything, not a Welk stall, not a student union cafe. And can that really be true? If it is, it will cheer America's enemies all over the world. Because if that's what the inner core, the blue chip of the American Secret Service really is like, then Charlie Chaplin could have written the script. But much more likely is that young Mr. Crooks was not the gunman. At least not the gunman that was supposed to hit the head of the former and soon-to-be current President of the United States. There must have been another shooter. Crooks was just the patsy, the Lee Harvey Oswald of this inside job. His head was helpfully blown apart, but only after he'd fired off 5 shots, it turns out. It turns out that there were Secret Servicemen at that building, but they were all inside the building. Just exactly how they were to protect the president from inside the building is yet to be explained, but it has been explained by the head of the Secret Service, a young woman whose name escapes me, that they hadn't a sniper on top of the roof because the roof had a slope on it, and she was afraid that the Secret Service men employed would fall off it. I'm not making any of this up. But there's now very real reason to believe that behind or on top of that water tower was the real gunman who came so very close to changing the course of American and indeed world history, that the mere strand of a blonde wig could possibly be all that turned the history of the mightiest country on earth, the history of the world conflicts in which we are in, is something that should not easily be brushed over. This is a major league scandal. And if Trump has any sense at all, and I know that it sometimes looks like he doesn't, he must keep the pressure up on this administration, not just for the incessant incitement that they have maintained over the last years, painting Trump as Hitler, as Stalin, as a Russian agent, which inevitably, ineluctably led to someone somewhere being prepared to go down in history as the young man that rid America of this turbulent priest. But incessant pressure on the Secret Service failure. I know, given he's in their hands until November, although I've always said that that is unwise, more unwise still for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to want anything to do with the FBI, anything to do with the CIA, anything to do with the Secret Service details, who almost certainly killed both his father and his uncle. I know that Trump is in a difficult position, but if I were him, I'd definitely have a shadow security team, a private shadow security team with me at all times from now until November. Because it's quite evident that the sheer desperation of the Democratic Party leaders and the Democrat establishment in the fancy newspapers and in the fading broadcasting companies, their desperation to stop Trump cannot just be about his syntax, his pussy grabbing, his bringing down the standards of the office, standards set by dozens of American presidents before him. It cannot be that. It must be something more serious. And my guess is that the answer lies in Ukraine. And my guess is that Trump knows that very well. Trump is going to strip bare the rampant, deep, multi-billion-dollar corruption of the American administration in Ukraine. All these 60 billion price tags that Zelensky takes away with him every time he visits the United States are about more, much more, than just providing half-tracks for the poor, bloody infantry of the Ukrainian armed forces. They are about corruption on a scale the likes of which we have never seen before, ever, in all human history. This is the biggest scandal case that hopefully will ever exist in human history. And Trump is zeroing in on it. When he says that he's going to stop the war between November and January, you better believe him, because there is nothing that Trump is more determined to do than stop the Ukrainian war, unseat the little Napoleon, Zelensky, and then open the books. And when he opens the books, all the way back to Burisma, the oil company that was paying Hunter Biden $80,000 a month for a no-show job, was just the tip of the iceberg. And that many other sons, daughters, nephews, nieces, mistresses, and whatever the male equivalent of mistresses is, were all on the payroll in Ukraine. They were all looting the Ukraine. But since the war began, the scale of American subvention to Ukraine can only smell like a huge money laundering operation. And it's going to bring a lot of people down. In corporate America, in the military-industrial complex, of course in the soon-to-be fleeing Ukrainian regime, but it will destroy the Democratic Party as we know it. I mean end it. Because the noses that were in the trough are the high and mighty of the Democratic Party, and Trump is going for it all. If you don't believe me, look at who he's picked as his vice presidential running mate. JDVance is many things, some of them honourable, some of them admirable, others deplorable. But let me just fasten on one of them for the moment. JDVance is even more hostile to the corruption between America and Ukraine than Donald Trump is. If Donald Trump showed any signs of faltering in the unmasking of this grand larceny of the American purse, JDVance is determined to steady his hand. Vance has opposed all of the subventions going to Ukraine. He has opposed the Ukraine war right from the beginning. He does not want or intend to see America enter World War III against Russia. The orange cowboy has picked the king of the hillbillies. His hillbilly elegy is a joy to read. It is a Rust Belt spectacular. And Vance is going to sweep the Rust Belt for the TrumpVance ticket by a landslide. They will win Ohio, Pennsylvania. They will win Wisconsin. They will win Michigan. And that's the end of the presidential election, folks, whatever happens elsewhere. So Vance is against World War III, against Russia. Against China, he's not so sure, although he did sagely make the point today at the Republican convention that China's rise and rise is fueled not by military bases, not by getting into war after war, but by development, by helping the countries that it is now in the closest possible alliance with through the Belt and Road Initiative. So at least, at last, a man who can see straight, if not shoot straight. The dangerous thing about Vance ties back to the issue of the assassination attempt. Vance may not want war with Russia. He may not even be sure about wanting war with China, but he sure wants war with Iran. Over and over and over again, Vance has stated that there's no point in little bombing runs, there's no point in punching Iran unless you punch it very hard indeed. And given that Vance, like Trump, is in the pocket of the Israel lobby in the United States to an extraordinary depth, you can be sure that Netanyahu will be working up the case for punching Iran hard in the first days of a Trump-Vance administration. So breathe a sigh of relief. We're not going to World War III unless it starts under Biden. And who's going to march to war under Joe Biden? Increasingly unhinged, demented. Unless it starts before November, we're not going to World War III in Ukraine, but we might very well be going to it in the Persian Gulf. And if that doesn't frighten you, you haven't been paying attention. The King's speech was today. There was no stammering, only starmering. And there was much bonhomie between the British front benches, Labour and Conservative, as they marched off to see the King. And what a foolish sight it all looked. A man in a £5 million crown, and his wife's crown worth only a little less, who travelled to the venue of the British Parliament, the mother of all parliaments, in a solid gold coach, costing millions. It was the King's speech today. He's waited a long time to do a King's speech, and it may be, God forbid, his last King's speech. But there was no question of stuttering or stammering involved, because this King's speech could as easily have been given in the hand of Rishi Sunak as it was in the hand of Keir Starmer. It was a blancmange of nothingness, a nothing burger for American viewers. It will do nothing to halt the slide to war in the world. It will do nothing to stop the burning of £12,000 per minute on weapons and war in Britain, whilst our public realm crumbles all around us, whilst our vital national assets, like the National Health Service, suffer and die until they cry out in pain for privatization and the American way. The truth is, this King's Speech will do nothing for the mass poverty that exists in our country. 4 million children in Britain went to school today hungry with no breakfast. Millions of our people in the cold winter to come, in this global boiling. It's July and I've got all my heating on. I've got my heater on in the car. There's plenty of greenery and quackery and wokery in the King's Speech, but no answers to the real problems suffered by people that in the wintertime have to choose between heating and eating. There was no hope or pretense of any lifting of the poverty pay earned by millions of people in Britain, which leads to a situation where the record number of food banks are attended by a record number of people in work. That's right. They're at work being paid, but being paid so little that they have to get their food from charity food banks. That's right. £12,000 a minute on weapons and war. Nothing on the minimum wage. Nothing on lifting the demographically insane cap on child benefits for families with more than 2 children. Insane. In a country that claims it doesn't want mass immigration, we're making it more and more difficult for our own people to have more children. We're punishing a third child for being born. It gets no child benefit under Labour and under Conservative. There will be no cap on bankers' bonuses in the King's Speech, just a cap on families with more than 2 children. Do the maths. The King's Speech has no answer to Britain's lost role in the world, drifting around the world like the Mare Celeste, with nobody apparently on board, no course charted, no direction home. In fact, home is the last direction that we appear to be going. David Lammy, the Eddie Amin of British politics, take a look at him, you'll know what I mean, has to be the most vulgar, clumsy, yet vainglorious oaf ever to hold the title of Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom. The mega expense claiming, multiple job enjoying fool chose as his first official trip abroad to go to Israel, the country that has given him hundreds of thousands of pounds in donations, and to shake the bloodied hand of Netanyahu and to tell him that this British government, like the last one, will stop the International Criminal Court from issuing an arrest warrant that would see his overseas travel radically diminished. He shook the hands of President Herzog, a hand last seen signing his autograph on rockets and shells that were about to rain down on the hundreds of thousands now dead Palestinians. Hundreds of thousands dead, according to the Lancet, from top experts. 186,000 dead. 8% of the Gaza population dead. Factor in the hundreds of thousands more who've been mutilated and maimed on a ratio of presumably 3 to 1. We are talking getting towards a half of all the people in Gaza who've been murdered or maimed, wounded, left homeless, living in tents in the baking midsummer heat in Gaza, with no power, no water, no food, no medicine, no functioning hospitals. And Lammy was there with his big, stupid grin to place the imprimatur of Prime Minister Keir Starmer on the great crime of the 21st century. It's all coming up in the next 1 hour and 40 minutes or so. So fasten your seatbelt and stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Mr. President, we got a report of a 50-foot woman marauding through Washington, sir.
Thank you, Captain. But I'm looking for a shorter woman, one who likes to take long strolls in the park and yell at minorities.
She's not looking for a date. She's terrorizing the city.
Is there a difference? A little levity. Call in the military.
We are the military, sir.
Boy, we got here fast. We better do something, right?
Shall I scramble the jets, Mr. President?
No thanks. I'll just take a muffin and some coffee.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
So here's our poll for the evening. Was Trump shooting a deep state inside job? Next week's is the Pope a Catholic? You can answer yes or no on Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, on Twitter, my X, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. And 25,569 of you have voted already. Get busy. You've still got an hour and a half or so to cast your vote. Well, was it a deep state inside job? Let's find out from America's hottest property on the internet, the one and only Jackson Hinkle. Jackson, there's only two possibilities, isn't there? Either you've got the Keystone Cops operating as your Secret Service, or they were in on the crime.
Yeah, I definitely believe this was an inside job. I mean, you have to look at this not just at the microscopic level of what took place that day, but you have to look at this in the span of what's happened to Donald Trump ever since he came down the escalator and announced he was running for president. From the political witch hunt of Russiagate to the attacks on him regarding holding up funding for Ukraine, to now the legal battle that has ensued over payments to Stormy Daniels and not showing that on his taxes. They've put him in prison, essentially. I mean, it's a crazy world we're living in, and they thought that all of this could stop him. It hasn't, and that's why they're now trying to kill him. I saw a news headline this morning. I don't know if you
They're
caught
trying to terminate him with extreme prejudice. I mean, it's not as if they haven't done it before, Jackson.
Yes, I saw a news headline this morning. I'm not sure if you saw it, but actually the photo of the shooter that was taken from an aerial shot above was actually taken 30 minutes before he fired his bullets on that very day. So the Secret Service was well aware of this individual. He was selected as some suspect character on the scene. There was security officials, I think it was the police officials that were inside the building that he actually climbed on top of. People knew his name. They were calling his name right before the shooting took place. There's a lot of weird stuff going on here. And of course, cui bono, who benefits? Well, the opposition leader in Ukraine, Medvedchuk, he came out and said that, of course, Zelensky, the neo-Nazi, would benefit immensely from taking out Donald Trump. And he thinks that Ukraine may have been behind this, or Ukrainian allied centers of power.
Well, I think the Democrats are desperate to avoid a Trump presidency, precisely because of the corrupt nature of their relationship with the regime and the previous regime in Ukraine. So it's hard to know where one set of interests ends and the other set of interests begins. But the shooter, let's call him the shooter, I doubt he was the shooter, but that shooter walked a mile carrying a ladder, an assault rifle, 50 rounds of ammunition, for 1 mile, went inside the perimeter to this building, put the ladder up against the wall, climbed up it, and lay there for, as you've just told us, 30 minutes with an assault rifle before anyone even attempted to target him. And he fired 5 shots from that rifle before the Secret Service opened fire on him. Now, there are all kinds of questions that arise from that. What were the police officials doing inside that building? Playing cards? Were they not even watching that nobody came to climb up on top of the building? What was their purpose of being inside that building? And didn't they hear someone on the roof? What were they, partying? And then there's the issue of this water tower, because there is audio of bullets traveling 475, the one, I think it was 500 or 400 yards from the top of the roof, the shooter that was killed, but the water tower was farther away. And there's audio which shows that some of these bullets were fired from farther away than the bullets fired from that roof. And then there's the excuse that there was nobody on the roof because it had a slope. So Secret Service guys can't operate on a sloping roof. Talk to all that, Jackson.
Well, the first thing I'll say is that the police officers inside the building where the shooter A was on top of, they actually saw him climb up on the top of the building. They said we saw him climb up and then we lost sight of him. I don't know where they thought he could have gone since he was clearly climbing to the top of their roof, but I guess we'll leave that to the investigations. And then you bring up a very important point with the water tower. There also is video showing that some of the bystanders in the crowd, directly the moment that the bullets began to fire, there appeared to be bullets coming from another direction, and you can actually see one of the projectiles hit the railing of the stands right behind some of these bystanders the very second that this all began. Unfortunately, for those who are trying to push the narrative that it was only one shooter, those bullets were coming from a different direction, if they were bullets. It looked like some sort of projectile to me. Clearly, the bystanders jumped when it happened, and they jumped in the direction that would have protected them from where these bullets were coming from. But again, no one in the press is actually doing any serious investigations into this. We also saw this morning that the shooter A, the one that is being blamed for all of this, he had a transmitter device and a cell phone that was right beside him on the roof of the building as he was carrying out this attack, which doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it definitely also draws some questions from me. And if I was a journalist at the New York Times, I'd want to look into it. And I'd want to see what this kid was talking about and who he was talking to, whether he was talking to potentially other shooters. And lastly, this is the weirdest part of all. Just yesterday, Dan Bongino, who's a very popular, political commentator, former Fox News host, he now has the biggest show on Rumble. He did a conversation with Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump Jr. at the Republican National Convention. And he and Tucker Carlson both confirmed that there is actually a testimony coming from an unimpeachable source within the deep state of Washington, D.C., who said that the director of the Secret Service was told to stay quiet about what went on this very day during the attempted assassination if he wants to keep his job. And he was told that by the Department of Homeland Security Director Mayorkas. So make of all of that what you will. I think it's extremely suspicious.
Let's talk about the convention now. Seems to have been a bit of a triumph to me. The Teamsters, forever and a day Democratic Party institution, were present at the RNC. The anti-corporate speeches that I heard would have been welcome at a conference featuring you and me. The anti-war, anti-Ukraine war at least, rhetoric that is going around was greatly cheering, and the appointment of Vance is, I think, a signal that we're not going to war with Russia over Ukraine unless it starts before November. But we may well go to war with Iran if we believe the previous pronouncements of Vance. Tell us more about him.
Well, you're 100% correct about the Teamsters president speaking at the Republican National Convention. First time that a Teamsters president has addressed the RNC in their over 120 years of existence. So that was a huge deal. And his speech was amazing. I'd like to highlight the quote from his speech where he said that the elite have no party, the elite have no country. And I think that that sums it up as to why he's open and willing to speak to any candidate, any political party, because that's the truth. You're going to find people from both political parties right now, actually, probably more so even in the Republican Party. You'll find more people who are going to stand with labor. And those people are few and far between. It's in no way, shape, or form the vast majority of candidates in the Republican Party. But there are some, and that's why they're open to speaking with the Republicans. I've long since predicted that this was going to happen, that labor was going to move closer to the Republican Party, or maybe won't endorse the presidential candidate in the race for the president. We'll see what happens. I think they're not going to endorse a candidate, which would be a massive move from the Teamsters Union, who has hundreds of thousands of, labor employees. So that would be really big. You bring up JDVance. JDVance is a guy who, yes, seems as though he doesn't want to go to war against Russia, but he has a logic fail, right? He says, I don't want to arm Ukraine to go to war with Russia, but I want to arm Taiwan to go to war against China, and I want to arm Israel more to go to war against Iran. I mean, the first thing this guy says at the RNC after he's selected to be the next vice president of the United States, he's not talking about saving America, homelessness in this country, infrastructure development. He said, if we really want to go after Iran, we can't do these small, tiny little bombing runs on Iran. We have to hit them hard. I mean, this guy's insane, but he's controlled by big moneyed interests that are trying to turn this anti-Russia sentiment in America into an anti-China and anti-Iran sentiment. It's even more foolish, I'd argue, than anti-Russian politics in the U.S., considering China has a standing army of 2.14 million active duty service members, and geographically, it's far less of a strategic point for the United States to attack. I mean, we'll send our warships over to the Taiwan Strait, they'll get blown up, and that'll be that. We already tried to send our warships to Yemen, and the Houthis were able to kill our Navy SEALs and blow up some of our ships, so I don't think we're going to perform any better against China. But hopefully Trump finds reason and logic to win at the end of the day. He's not someone who's particularly hawkish on China. So I have my fingers crossed, but I'm not particularly hopeful about the direction that this new White House will head in.
And where does all this leave Crazy Joe? The videos that are coming out fast and furious now show that he's completely lost his mind. It is a serious case of elder abuse. The party and his family and his key advisor, the virtuous Hunter Biden, are subjecting their father, husband to cruel and unusual punishment. But isn't it now the case that Trump is so nailed on to be the winner in November that nobody else would want to be the candidate, swept away in a red tsunami?
Yeah, I mean, I saw today a great quote. The bullet that was fired a few days ago, it hit Donald Trump, but it killed the Biden campaign. And that's where we're at now. I mean, all you have to do is look at what happened to Ronald Reagan when, after he survived an assassination attempt, you know, he was a relatively popular president. Of course, I have huge problems with him personally, but he, after he survived an assassination attempt, he won almost every single state in the union. So Donald Trump, I think, is going to have, all but one. Donald Trump's going to have a blowout victory, and Joe Biden will be delegated to the retirement home. If he's lucky, if he's not lucky, maybe he'll see some time in prison, although I think he might be too old for that. I think they'll save the prison sentence for Hunter Biden.
So the struggle now turns to what you might call the coming struggle for Donald Trump. Will he follow some of his populist instincts, both in domestic policy and in foreign policy, or will, like he did the last time, he surround himself by Pompeos and Boltons and all the worst creatures of the swamp?
Well, in D.C., in the Republican world, I think there's three layers of characters that Trump could associate himself with. He could associate himself with the worst of the worst, which are the Boltons and the Pompeos. He could associate himself with the second worst off people, JDVance and his clique of people, Vivek Ramaswamy, Peter Thiel, all these characters. And then the best clique of people he could surround himself with are individuals like Colonel Douglas McGregor, and I think Tulsi has big problems on Israel and Gaza, but she's stellar on Syria, she's stellar on Iran, she's stellar on Russia. So I think we'll have to see what happens with the cabinet picks, with who he selects as, Secretary of Defense and the State Department in particular, because right now the selection of JDVance isn't making me feel great. But what I will say is, as a final point on this, John Bolton was in the Trump administration for quite some time. And eventually Trump got rid of these horrendous figures and replaced them with people like Colonel Douglas McGregor at the very end of his administration. But John Bolton was trying to get Trump to go to war with China. He kept talking about these plans for color revolutions in Xinjiang, in Hong Kong, in Tibet, and in Taiwan. And Donald Trump actually told John Bolton, Bolton admitted this, he said, John, I don't want to ever hear from you again anything regarding Tibet, Taiwan, Hong Kong, or Xinjiang. And then he fired John Bolton. So I think Trump is actually a bit smarter than we give him credit for. I hope that he's not duped, manipulated, or, with full sincerity, I hope he doesn't do anything that's going to be wrong in the coming presidency. But again, I don't really have a whole lot of hope. I think he's a wild card, and I think there's a 70% chance that we're going to get some pretty awful foreign policy out of him. But that's better than most politicians in D.C.
Even a stopped clock is right twice a day. The broken clock of Joe Biden isn't ever right. Jackson Hinkle, as always, pleasure talking to you. Thanks for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. So what do you think? You've heard Jackson. Was Trump shooting a deep state inside job? Yes or no? 27,378 have now voted. It's pretty strongly yes so far, but quite a decent number of people who say no, particularly on Twitter. Perhaps the NAFO fellas have been active again. Okay, it's your calls coming up after this short break. Stay tuned. I I discussed with Mr. Jeremy Corbyn on the telephone, and I have told him that I am now going to announce that I, the Workers' Party, and I believe millions in the country, call on Jeremy Corbyn to launch a British version of the new Popular Front. He may or may not want to form a party himself. Others will remain in their own parties. But he must be the leader of a Popular Front. He's not a perfect leader, Mr. Corbyn. None of us are perfect leaders, but he is the leader. And he does have a seat in Parliament with which to lead the millions of people who today and increasingly over the next months and years will reject the policy, personalities and direction of a Keir Starmer government. So, Mr. Corbyn, I told you I was going to say these words, and I now formally say them. On behalf of the Workers' Party of Britain, we ask you to lead and unite all the forces of the left, of the radical forces in Britain who reject neoliberalism, who reject endless war, who oppose genocide. Mr. Corbyn, lead us. We will follow you. And I very much hope to hear positive news on that from you by return.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
So if you want to call the show, it's toll free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 0808 196 5522. And the worldwide number for all other countries is 44203 966 2625. Now remember, if you've just joined the show, you can download the MOATS podcast from tomorrow. You get that compressed, bite-sized version straight to your phone or computer. This podcast is breaking all records. We're in the top 10 again in China this week, with a top 10 showing, I think, for the first time in Turkey, Pakistan, and Belize. Just think about that. Turkey, Pakistan, Belize, and China. We are in the top 10 podcasts in all those countries, different language groups entirely. So you can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen right now. Let's go to Gordon in Lewis, the Isle of Lewis, if I'm any judge, on the issue of false flags. Gordon, welcome.
Good evening, George, and once again, thank you for having me on your show. And I would like to begin by saying I accept full liability, and these are just my opinions. But as Donnie John said in 2017, it's all a movie. They've been doing it since the Titanic. They've been doing it since Pearl Harbor. They've been doing it since Kennedy, etc., etc., etc. And this week, we are victim of the latest. You put up the picture of the Mount Suribachi lookalike where they're holding up the flag, blah-de-blah-de-blah. It's all about media. It's all about getting the people swayed one way or the other. But George, I'm behind you. Stand with the independents, stand with the truth tellers, and you've been doing that for millennia. So that's all I wanted to say. And I would like to shout out to
awfully kind, Gordon. Awfully kind. Of course, there are conspiracy theories, and not infrequently they become conspiracy facts. Sometimes it takes decades. Increasingly, it's much faster than that. But I'd eat my hat if the story we've been told to date is the whole story in the whisker that separated Donald Trump living and dying over the last few days. RB is in Canada on the Secret Service. Let's hear from RB. Go ahead, sir.
Hello, George. How are you doing?
All good, thank you. What would you like to say?
Well, there's an old saying, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And stop me if you haven't heard this before. A lone gunman with 3 names, who conveniently dies shortly afterwards. So, and as you know, dead men tell no tales. So, of course, there's going to be the cover-up commission coming up, where everything will be covered up, and witnesses' statements will be excised, and the immediate knowledge of what happened will be compartmentalized. And after the cover-up commission is done, the Secret Service and the FBI and the CIA will say, you have to understand, we need more funding. You have to give us more money so this doesn't happen again. And then slowly it'll fade from memory, and then 10, 20, maybe 30 years from now, the whole story will eventually emerge. But by then, all the perpetrators will be long dead in their grave or well outside the purview of the actual justice system. I'm telling you, George, it stinks to high heaven. Nothing makes sense. There's no way a proper Secret Service detail would let anything like that happen. That shooter, from that vantage point, could be easily seen by rally goers and witnesses complaining to the cops and the Secret Service at the time that there's a guy on the roof, and they allowed that guy to just do it. And of course, there's a water tower, and I think that is the key. And in the future, we will find out exactly what happened. If anybody will lose their job over this, will Kimberly Cheetle, the head of the Secret Service, actually lose her job over this or be punished in any way? Will any of the names of the Secret Service people that were temporarily allocated to President Trump's service, will those names emerge? That is the thing we've got to look at. Will actually any heads roll over this? I doubt it very highly.
Well, if heads don't roll over the head of the president almost being blown apart by a gunman spotted already by hundreds of people at the rally, and spotted already, we now know, by the police who were inside the building, on top of which he fired the shots, allegedly. But the whole thing stinks, as you say, RB, right down to the identity of the patsy. Is there a 20-year-old in America who's not on any social media, who has no Facebook, no Twitter, no Instagram, nothing, a complete clean skin? Is there anybody other than Crooks that you could say that about? I've never met a 20-year-old who doesn't have too huge a footprint on social media. Yet this shooter had none. RB, thanks for that call. EF says the sloping roof comment by the Secret Service director shows how unfit she is to head anything. And Benny Hill said, lol, Trump had 4 years to drain the swamp. Does he need another 4 years? And Tanvir Kabir says Trump signing the Jerusalem deal is the biggest mistake he made that led to the current situation in Palestine. Next, with breaking news from the world, is Simon from Weaponized News. And it's always worth hearing him. But let's squeeze in Will in California on JDVance first. Go ahead, Will. Oh, sorry. Let's go to Simon first, because he's got to get away. Simon, always a pleasure.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. Greetings. In fact, my 60th greetings to you and your worldwide audience. So what we have occurring...
Congratulations.
Today and yesterday at the United Nations, in this case hosted by Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Federation foreign minister, has been, starting with what occurred yesterday, a open symposium hosted in the Security Council chamber for countries to consider the role of multilateralism in forming what they were calling a just and democratic new global order, which to many people might sound like a new world order, depending on how you translate the synonym global, of course. And what was particularly interesting, beyond the introduction that they had put out in the form of a concept paper, was the incredible lineup of countries representing the global south. apart from the European governments that were actually on the Security Council and had to sit there, as was their right and obligation, almost everyone else who spoke did indeed, and that is obviously numerically likely, represent the other 85% of the world that is otherwise known as the global south. Now, the word that was used most often, other than multilateral, which simply means lots of countries cooperating together, often within a specific forum, was the word, or indeed the phrase, summit of the future. Now, this isn't a particularly new idea in the sphere of globalists, but is actually a scheme to greatly enhance and indeed accelerate the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, and is designed to come up with a new plan for the future global governance. So people may wish to go to un.org or UNRIC.org and just type in Summit of the Future. It's going to happen on the 23rd and 24th of September, but all the globalist bureaucrats are already negotiating what is going to happen there. And in much the same way as the World Health Organization have been today and yesterday negotiating, which is still going on, the new pandemic treaty, there are other bureaucrats who have many, many other schemes afoot. That's available in several different languages. So even your worldwide audience who might not be happy reading English as their mother tongue, they will be able to see many of the other United Nations languages there. And it will help get the show audience up to speed now for what is intended to be a really, really momentous event. Now, obviously, that could potentially cause a problem for the US elections, because they're essentially going to be able to give up their veto power or have it sincerely diminished, the Russians as well. But it's clear that the Russians and Chinese have essentially co-opted this process, and they're turning it from environmentalism to actually making the West fulfill their unfulfilled pledges, which have gone outstanding for a decade now. And so when your UK taxpayers think, well, how the heck does this affect me? There's a decade of pledges that are now due. And we're talking about trillions with a T of dollars. So we've obviously got that going on. And then today, there was an open debate on Palestine. Once again, a great number of countries looking to speak. But unfortunately, in terms of actually having a positive achievement, it does appear to be a lot of jaw. But what has been very interesting to observe is in the conference room opposite the Security Council chamber, Lavrov, who's been opening the two meetings, has just had bilateral meeting after bilateral meeting, just one country after another coming into that meeting room and having like 30 minutes or so with him. So you can see how they're really, really working the agenda post the SCO summit.
Yeah, calling the shots. And yet we're told that Russia is isolated, Simon. But when you see Lavrov, who's the kind of Pele of international diplomacy, in the chair, calling the shots, dictating the agenda, meeting a queue of people to see him from countries all over the global south, you realize it ain't Russia that's isolated at all, is it?
No, you're absolutely right in that. And it's interesting that somebody I'm sure you're familiar with, Lord George Robertson, has been brought out of retirement in order to conduct the UK's strategic defence review. But he's also shown his hand by writing in the FT and the Guardian by saying that the UK public need to understand that they've got to cough up for the defence of the realm, since they're now opposed by the North Koreans, the Iranians, the Chinese and the Russians simultaneously, and that they're a direct threat. And I would beg the audience, if they only consider one thing that happened out of the NATO summit last week, was the closing remarks of Admiral Bauer, who's the Norwegian four-star admiral, who's the military equivalent of Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General, interestingly enough, who today has just appointed a British civil servant called Nick Turner to go and be the representative of NATO in Kiev. So the Brits are getting even deeper into that quagmire. That Norwegian general said that as he travels around the world and meets all the leading politicians, they say, "Oh, General, we've given you a vast amount of money. The problem's yours now." And he's been turning around to them and saying, "Sir, you may have coughed up the money, but the problem that remains is the problem of bodies." And he tells them that they have to start debating in their parliaments conscription, reserve duty, and recruitment. And he's saying that they need hundreds of thousands more bodies, not recruits.
There's no doubt at all about it. I first met now Lord George Robertson exactly 50 years ago. Exactly. He drove me home from Aberdeen, where I had attended and spoken at my very first Scottish Labour Party conference. He was then a trade union official. I know it's hard to believe now. He was a trade union official of the GMB union, though he never was much of a Boilermaker. But he was always an Atlanticist, always a slavishly pro-American individual. And I recall, believe it or not, the conversation 50 years ago in the car driven by him from Aberdeen to Dundee. I recall it vividly. The one thing I'll say about him is he's never changed. He hasn't pretended to be one thing, but whilst actually being something different. He's always been a warmongering American advocate. He has lobbied and advocated for the United States and its military-industrial complex all of his life for 50 years. And he's now been dug up from the political graveyard of the House of Lords to head up a UK defence review, having been the defence minister of Tony Blair, the war minister of Tony Blair, and the head of NATO. Don't they have any newer people, any younger people, any people still working at the political coalface? Why are they digging up the George Robertsons, the Jackie Smiths, and the suppurating corpses of the House of Lords? It's truly extraordinary. But one thing stuck in my mind from what Lord George Robertson said not 50 years ago, but not 5 days ago. He described China as a deadly threat to the United Kingdom. And I actually spent 10 full minutes of my life trying to work out what he meant. Is China going to come here? China going to attack us? Invade us? Turn up and turn all our fish and chip shops into chicken chow mein houses? What do you mean, George? China doesn't give Britain 1 minute's thought. We are nothing, short of committing national suicide by firing the American nuclear weapons that we possess. We can do nothing to China. And if you leave China alone, it will do nothing to you. But statements like that, George, and I remind you, while I passed my Part 1 examination in the Royal Artillery Army Cadet Force, you failed it. I can assemble an SLR and disassemble it in the dark. You could not. So don't play the tough soldier with me. Can I squeeze in a call? I can't. Hedge says, George, not everyone is on social media. Facebook has been over for young people forever. Thanks, Hedge. And Julius Ceasefire, that's brilliant. Best name of the night. Julius Ceasefire says Trump probably had an open packet of ketchup in his hand. It's remarkable the number of people who actually believe that. Mohammed Darani says, yup, George supports Trump, even though they were chanting for Israel at the RNC. Which part of what I said is me supporting Trump, you half-wit, Mohammed? Which part? Was it when I called them all these names that I was supporting them? Or is it because I think Genocide Joe is an even greater danger to the safety and peace of the world than Donald Trump? Which part of that can you not understand? In fact, Mohammed Darani, call me now from wherever you are in the world. I'm going to have it out with you. I'm sick of idiots like you. Stay tuned. There's another hour of this to go. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Hello, George. I heard Neil Kinnock commenting on you losing your seat, okay? I was disgusted and amazed at what he said. He was like an ignorant football supporter. He actually punched his fist in the air, saying he was delighted that you were gone, that you were a horrible person. That's the first thing he said. When he was leader of the Labour Party, he was conniving morning, noon and night to kick you out of the party. Now, this is before Tony Blair, and you were in good standing with the Labour Party. Mr. Kinnock, that chap just totally disgusted me. So what I think the British have to do, and the Irish and everybody else, is they need a new conversation and stop drinking Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And I think all those people in British civil society, including Jeremy Corbyn, Diane Abbott, Ken Livingstone, and very many more, have to have a conversation about how to wean the British and everybody else away from these Coca-Cola and Pepsi parties.
Nobody knows who Neil Kinnock is. Those who know who he is know he's the man from the Welsh Valleys that betrayed the miners. Frankly, the hatred of Neil Kinnock I wear not even as a badge of honour, a little tiny pin maybe, because pretty soon no one will have heard of him at all. But the wider subject that you raise is the important one. I don't know, Jeremy says he doesn't want to form a party. That's fine by me. I've got my own party. I'll be staying in it anyway. But what I would like him to do is to announce a new popular front, like the one that has just, I can tell you officially, won the French parliamentary elections.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Was the Trump shooting a deep state inside job, and do bears defecate in the woods? Yes or no? You can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my X, my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. We have passed a very important milestone. We're now on 453,000 subscribers. And I'm still waiting for my plaque that I earned when I got 100,000 subscribers, Mr. YouTube. What have you got against me? Is it because I'm black? What is it? I've now got 453,000. So my ambition is by the end of the year to get to 500,000 subscribers. That means 47,000 to go. So please spread the word. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Mohammed Darani said on YouTube, is he chickening out? It said my call could not be completed as dialed. Oh, come on, Mohammed. That's a bit lame. If you're in the US or Canada, it's +1 844 944 3344 and it's free. If you're in the UK or Ireland, it's 08081 96 5522. If you're in the rest of the world, it's 44203 966 2625. Which part of those telephone numbers can't you understand? I'm waiting, Mohammed. Live up to your name. Be a man. Call me. Elijah Magnier is one of the great sages of the mother of all talk shows. We bring him on to talk about European affairs mostly, but he's also a very considerable expert in the Middle East, and it's about that I want to start with him this evening. He's a veteran war zone correspondent and political analyst. Elijah, you're certainly in the right place to be analysing war zones. What is the latest on what we might call the Southern Front if you're in Lebanon, the Northern Front if you are in Israel? Some days we think the balloon is about fully to go up and that World War III is about to break out along the Litani River, and the next day it goes quiet. What's going on?
Hello, George, and thank you for having me. It's great to be on your show. Now, on the Lebanese front, we've heard so many talks from the Israeli officials, starting from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the defense minister to the chief of staff. They all said they're going to attack Lebanon if diplomacy fails. But they never said they're going to do it because they are really stuck with Gaza, 364 square kilometers, where they cannot, one of the greatest army in the Middle East and one of the strongest army in the world, defeat just a handful of militants who are defending their territory. How they can imagine going to Lebanon, that is 10,500 square kilometers, where they are facing people like Hezbollah who are ready and have been trained all these decades in Iraq, in Syria, against ISIS and Al-Qaeda to defeat the Israelis in 2006 and also wait for them in the next war. With all the problem that the Israeli army is having, they're not going to dare to go into Lebanon. On the contrary, they have asked the British, the French, the German, the Americans, even offered Hezbollah to be in control of Lebanon, to select themselves the president, to do whatever they want on the condition that they stop the war on the Lebanese front. And Hezbollah refused and said, you stop the war on Gaza, you stop killing the civilians and children and women, and then we will stop. So far, we have seen how the Israeli army is incapable of defeating the Palestinian resistance. How can we consider that the Israeli army is going to break into Lebanon when the Lebanese are equipped with laser-guided missile that can hit any Merkava tank 8 kilometers before they enter into the Lebanese borders, when the Merkava tank range is 4 kilometers. We have seen drones flying over all the occupied territory or the controlled territory by Israel for the first time, really scanning the whole north and east and showing all the defense system, the interception Israeli system, the military complex, the Haifa naval base, the submarines, the airports, and returning to the base in Lebanon and never being intercepted. And then we've heard the Israeli spokesperson, Admiral Daniel Hagari, saying Hezbollah has fired 5,000 rockets, missile, and drone against Israel. So Hezbollah has given 5,000 reasons for the Israelis to fire back and start a war. And yet, after 10 months, the Israelis keep threatening, but they conduct defensive maneuvers, not attacking maneuvers. And they keep saying, we want to go into the Lebanon, but never cross foot inside the Lebanese territory.
The Hezbollah leader, Said Hassan Nasrallah, made an important pronunciamento today, I think. One highlight was he warned Israel that they would destroy every single tank that the Israeli armed forces have. What else was in the speech, Elijah?
The most important part was actually what you said, but there is another point is when he said, any civilian that you kill from now on, we're going to bomb a new settlement, which means that Hezbollah so far has been restricting its bombardment against only and solely military objectives, not targeting civilians. But the Israelis have killed more than 70 civilians, including medic personnel and children and other women that they call collateral damage, where Hezbollah said today, enough. If you kill any civilian, we're going to start going an eye for an eye and tit for tat, and we will hit settlement that we have never hit, which means Hezbollah is going to introduce new weapons that have not been introducing in this war because there is no need to. There are dozens of military targets along the Lebanese borders in the Syrian Golan Heights that is occupied by the Israelis, and there are plenty of sitting duck Israelis along the borders. Though now the Israelis are targeting civilians more on purpose, and they increasing the killing of civilians, where Hezbollah is sending a warning that has been the same case in the past, when the Israeli for several months did not dare to show up on the borders, and saying, if you show up one single soldier because you've killed our militant in Syria, we're going to hunt you down. And they disappeared. And Benjamin Netanyahu, many years ago, was also prime minister, and he offered them objectives to saying, please hit them so we finish it, and to end the embarrassment. I think the Israelis will not dare to hit any civilians. And if they do, I don't think it's going to be on purpose, but it's one going to help the Israelis because they're going to be hit back. And Hezbollah Secretary General Said Nasrallah always maintained and kept his promises.
Yes, one of the few Arab leaders to do that. Of course, the tension and the attrition, the war of attrition that has been going on this whole 10 months, it wouldn't be right to describe what the situation is as peace on the Lebanese border. There are people dying, there are rockets flying, there is military activity every day, but just not full-scale war. Yet, notwithstanding that, the northern settlements in the apartheid state are effectively ghost towns now. The people have abandoned them. They know that these places are not safe for them to live in. That will have an economic impact on the Israeli economy. The production and farming in these northern settlements is now lost to the Israeli economy. The people who fled are internally displaced and are a net cost on the Israeli taxpayer. The port of Eilat has declared bankruptcy thanks to the activities of the Yemenis in the Red Sea. And of course, a huge number of people have already left the state of Israel, and many of them may not come back. Indeed, a quarter of all Israelis polled today say that they are actively looking to leave the country and to go back to either the country they came from in North America or Europe or somewhere else. All of this should not be underestimated, should it, as a real drag and toll on the Israeli economy and on the Israeli state, and by extension, its ability to wage war.
Absolutely. You've raised many important points. First of all, you talked about the lack of security that the settlers and the people who have decided to come and steal Palestinian lands, but they also have said, according to the, for example, the Orthodox Jews, the Haredim, they said, if you force upon us the military service, we will leave. The people in the north on the borders with Lebanon also said, we will leave. It means they have somewhere else to go. They have nothing to relate them to the land, but 2 points: the security that the army is offering and the security that the government is offering. Today, all the Israelis and the settlers are saying, we've lost the security. Therefore, they have no longer reason to stay. And because of that, starting from the 7th of October, when the first time we heard the Israelis saying that we no longer trust in our army and in our government, that is the beginning of the decline of the occupation of Palestine. Because when they have nothing to relate them to the land and they have no security offered by the army, then they can't stay. People will not return with the borders with Lebanon because they are saying the government is completely disregarding our interests, and we are totally forgotten here, which means that the government and the army are no longer in a position to defend them. And they no longer in a position to defend all the Gaza envelope, all the settlements around Gaza. Then where all the Israelis are going together in the middle, in case of war with Lebanon, this is where they're going to be bombed. If the Israelis start bombing the Lebanese cities inland, but not limited to the borders. Therefore, no place in Israel will be secure. No place in Israel will be offering any shelters, particularly if they live without electricity and water, like the Palestinians are living today, and like the Lebanese have lived in 2006, and like Hezbollah has the intention to impose that on the Israeli if Israel dare to start a war. So today, there is a lack of security dominating in Israel. For the first time, we see the head of the army, the director of the Mossad, the head of the Shabak, the internal security forces, all attacking Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, asking him to apologize for the insult he's directing toward the army, because he is blaming the army for the failure of not destroying Hamas and putting an end to the resistance. And the army is saying, you cannot defeat Hamas. And we have done everything in our power to destroy Gaza, to kill as many civilians as possible. The army has destroyed the United Nations building, the European Union building. They've destroyed all the hospitals, everything related to the infrastructure, road, plantation, agriculture, everything. And the Palestinians are resisting. So because of that, because of this soul and the power of every single member of the Palestinian community, combatant or non-combatant, the Israelis are finding themselves in a position where it is impossible to defeat these people. They are starting to learn the lesson. And if a war with Lebanon starts, which is very unlikely, then I don't think many people are going to remain in the occupied Palestine. So this is where we are at today.
Elijah Magnier, masterful tour of the horizon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. 28,800 of you have voted overwhelmingly, but still on X, quite a significant number of no's, but overwhelmingly yes. People think it was an inside job. Now, coming up, I invited Mohammed Darani to come and have a go if he thought he was hard enough. Turns out he does think he's hard enough. He's on the line and he's up next after this short break. You don't want to miss it, I promise you. Now, you're used to telephoning questions into me on my various shows. I've spoken with thousands of you over the last couple of decades. But now, on my new show, you get a chance to appear in person on a video wall. It would be good to see what you looked like as well as what you sounded like. It's very simple to get on my show. Go to www.haveitoutwithgalloway.com. just registered there. We'll get you on the television with me. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Do join me on my new show, Have It Out with Galloway. You can write to be in the televised audience on the video wall, www.haveitoutwithgalloway.com. Let's go first to Sean in Northern Ireland. Go ahead, Sean.
Hello, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, good, thank you. What would you like to say?
I was just wanting to comment on the assassination attempt of Donald Trump. I was watching a show on YouTube. You're maybe familiar with it, Redacted, with Clayton and Natalie. But
yes, good friends of ours.
Yes, they've mentioned you a couple of times. They were saying they had an expert on, so they did. I think it was yesterday. And, well, first of all, the young lad that was shot on the roof, the first sniper, he appeared in a BlackRock ad in his school 2 years before that, and it showed it on his program. Plus, the second shooter, in an analysis by a sniper from the Canadian Prime Minister's sort of protection force, calculated the second shot or shots came from the gymnasium in Butler, but it's in direct line with that water tower that you were saying. So I was wanting to think what you thought
450 yards. The audio, I did see the Redacted show. It was a terrific show, as always. Our good friends put on a great show at Redacted. And it's there that I learned that some of the shots that were fired by audio analysis came from 450 yards away, not 150 yards, which was the distance between the patsy on the roof and Trump. He was 150 yards or less from Trump, but some of the shots were fired from 450 yards. And 450 yards away, quite conveniently, one finds a water tower and an even better vantage point to be firing a weapon at the podium and at the president. So I did see it, Sean. It's the plot thickens, don't you think?
It definitely does, yeah. I think it points more towards the gymnasium directly behind the water tower, though.
Okay, I'll need to look more deeply into that. Sean, thanks for that call. Now, Mohammed in California thinks that I'm supporting Trump. Let's hear why. Mohammed, welcome to the show.
Yes. How are you doing?
By the grace of God, I'm good. I'm ready to have a good argument with you. So go ahead, make your case.
Yeah, so all I'm saying is that every time something happens with Trump, you speak so fondly of him. You say that the establishment is after him and that they don't want him in power. But at the same time, at the Republican National Convention, they're chanting Israel, Israel first, and all this stuff. And it just doesn't add up, what you're saying. What you're saying doesn't add up. They're not.
Okay, now, first of all, you're going to have to give me examples of me speaking fondly, to use your word, of Donald Trump. If we take tonight, no, hold on. If we take tonight's show, for example, I've called him an imbecile. I've called him the Orange Cowboy. I've called him Zion Don. I've said that whilst he doesn't want war with Russia, he may very well want war with China, and he certainly wants war with Iran. I've called him an accomplished killer on Have It Out with Galloway last night. I call him as many names as my febrile imagination can produce. So give me an example of me speaking fondly of Donald Trump. Go on.
This episode is called Trump Triumph. What does that mean?
Well, the triumph he's about to have in November in the presidential elections, unless you think otherwise.
But why
do you?
is it a triumph? It's only a triumph for people who support him. It's not a triumph. It's horrible. It's horrible that he's going to win. It's actually
if Spain win the European Football Championships, it's Spain triumph. Whether you're a supporter of the team they beat, England, or not. The words Trump triumph are a simple statement of fact.
Okay, and then rewatch your episode with Nico and Garland Nixon? What's his name?
On
Nixon,
Sunday, yeah.
Nixon. Garland Nixon.
Yeah,
Nico,
Garland
yeah,
Nixon
and, Rachel
and Nico House, yeah. Yeah.
That whole episode, you were talking about how the establishment doesn't want Trump in power and how he's going to be the person that's
they don't, Mohammed. Well, they don't,
What do you
Mohammed.
mean
They just tried to kill him. They just tried to kill him.
Tried to kill him? No, they didn't. No, they didn't. Establishment tried to kill him.
Who tried to kill him then?
I highly doubt that.
Well,
I mean,
you're in a minority because 30,000.
We don't know what happened.
Okay, Mohammed, I'll come back to you. 30,000 people have voted on the poll tonight on whether or not the Trump shooting was a deep state inside job. Here's the results. On Telegram, 88% yes. On Twitter, 76% yes. On the YouTube community poll, 82% yes. On the YouTube stream, 86% yes. Out of 30,000 people, well over 80% think the deep state tried to kill Trump. But you don't think that. Why?
Because he's part of the deep state. That's why. It was a staged
So if it
attempt.
wasn't the
That's what
deep state,
happened.
who was it then? Who tried to kill him?
Nobody tried to kill him. It was staged. It was completely staged, so that way they can get Christians like you and other people, extremist Christians, to get behind a war with the Muslims in Palestine and everywhere else.
So they staged it. He wasn't really shot in the ear, or was it staged to the extent that the gunman knew he would only hit him in the ear and not in the head? Was it tomato ketchup? What was it, Mohammed? And do you realize how crazy you sound?
Oh, we don't know exactly. We don't know exactly what happened, but it's clear that this was something that there was more to it than what was just on the surface, right? We've already established that.
You know that the killer was a Jew, right? Mohammed, you know that the killer was Jewish, right?
Yeah.
So they put up a Jewish boy to kill Trump so that Trump would lead a jihad against the Muslims. Is that your thesis? Do you know, I repeat my question, just how crazy you sound?
That's what they want, George. That's what they want.
Why did they put a Jewish boy up to do it then? Why didn't they put a Muslim up to do it?
They do. I'm not in their heads. I don't know why they do what they do, but they are very sophisticated. They know exactly what they're doing. They know how to play. They know how to play all of us. And they do a lot of
I don't know who's
flags.
playing
It's
you,
not like this is something...
but I don't know who's playing you, or maybe you're just very young. Maybe you missed the entire Russiagate destabilization of the first Trump presidency on the bogus hoax that Trump was a Russian agent. Did you miss that? Or was that the establishment at work?
That was the establishment at work.
So
that was the establishment.
1 minute Trump is part of them, and the next minute they're trying to destroy him. Is that your case?
They're making it look like they're trying to destroy him, so that way everybody gets behind him, because now he's the perfect martyr.
Russiagate, I asked you about. Why did they try to destroy his first presidency with the hoax that he was an agent of Vladimir Putin?
They're just trying to pull the wool over our eyes. They're trying to get us to think that, he's an enemy of Biden, and so they're just, I don't know, man. I don't know.
I know that you don't know, man. I know that you don't know. I knew it from the first minute that you started speaking. I know that you don't know, man. Let me ask you a third question then. Mohammed, let me ask you a third question. I don't know if this is the first show that you've watched. Well, we know it's the second. Do you know that I've been supporting Dr. Jill Stein's presidential candidature from the first day that it was announced? Did you know that?
I mean, that's good. That's great. But you think the establishment is after Trump. They're not after Trump. I guarantee you. And time will tell. Just wait. Just wait. You'll see. You'll see. He'll carry out everything.
They just tried to blow his head off.
No,
Mohammed, they just tried in plain sight to blow his head off.
Who did? Who did? Who did? Who did? Tell me, George, who did? If you're so smart, who tried to blow his head off?
I'm struggling here. I'm struggling with the American education system here. The Secret Service were on the roof and didn't stop the youth, the Jewish youth, firing 5 shots at Donald Trump. Does the Secret Service represent the establishment or not? Are they part of the establishment or not? What?
Is who part of the establishment?
The Secret Service.
How do you know who did it? How do you know who's behind it? How do you know who's behind it? You guys are all just guessing.
I've watched the Secret Service gunmen fail to take out the shooter until he'd already fired 5 shots. I watched it with my eyes.
You watched it with your eyes. You were there. You were there at the event. You saw everything happen.
With my eyes.
You saw everything unfold, George. You saw everything unfold. Is that what happened?
I've seen all of the videos, so I have seen how everything unfolded. Yes. Let me refer you, as clearly you don't find me a credible source, to your fellow Americans in the redacted program, the Morrises. Put it on after this show. Watch last night's episode of Redacted. Then tell me that you still don't believe that this was an inside job mounted by the establishment. But I can't let you go without putting this point to you. Just because I think Joe Biden is a demented and dangerous fool does not mean that I love Donald Trump and speak fondly of him. You have to understand, hard in California, I know, that life is not binary. Because you're against the guy who's president doesn't mean you are in favor of the guy who's trying to defeat him. Especially when I've shouted myself hoarse for Dr. Jill Stein as the only decent presidential candidate. I've got to tell you, Mohammed, I expected better from you. I hope you'll go away, lick your wounds, watch what you need to watch, and then call me again on Sunday, and we'll have round 2 of Galloway versus Mohammed in California. Monica De Bruyne says he's got Trump derangement syndrome. He's the stereotypical Californian. Yeah. Chi Long Kwa says, conspiracy theorist, wow. And Jenny Lynn says, what about the dead guy? Was he real? Very good point. Wish I'd thought to make it, Jimmy. What about the dead guy, the 50-year-old former fire chief who's dead now, protecting his wife and children from the bullets, real bullets, that were flying around. He's dead. Was he real? Benny Hill says, I agree with the caller, wearing a blood pack under his cap. He didn't have a cap on his ear. What's wrong with you people? What is wrong with you? You can hear the bullets. Thanks to some wondrous photographic work, you can see the bullets. You can see the damage to the ear. You can see the blood. You people remind me of the great Groucho Marx joke of the man whose wife comes in and catches him in bed with his secretary. And Groucho says, who are you going to believe? Me or the evidence of your own eyes? For God's sake, shake yourselves of this Trump derangement syndrome. Will is in California on JDVance. I'm sure there are more sensible people in California. Will's about to prove it to us. Go ahead, Will.
Good afternoon, George. That was a crazy call. Hey, if we can't criticize our politicians, who can we criticize? Remember, he's not your savior.
Exactly.
He's your coach. JDVance
Exactly.
Quietly reeks of Trump's inner circle with his PAC manager and chief of staff who's tied to the World Economic Forum, obviously influencing many of his decisions. And I was glad JD at least admitted the past criticism of Trump, and I actually applaud him, as we cannot be cultists worshiping false gods. Trump and Vance are two who support pharma and war over there in Israel, and Vance has worked with some big tech. I'm not sure about this, but I'm going to go with it. What do you think?
Well, I think first, let me say the positives. There are two positives. JDVance is sane, unlike Nikki Haley, who might well have been the nominee. Unlike most of the other names that were tipped to be the VP running mate, I think that Vance is sane. I think he's a very beautiful writer. I think his hillbilly elegy is a work of great art. I think he's a very effective campaigner in the Rust Belt, in the states where the presidency will be won, and which were already knife edge in the balance. Some of them won, some of them lost to Biden last time in 2020. These are positives, but his biggest positive is that he doesn't want war with Russia in Ukraine. And that's my business, because if there's war with Russia in Ukraine, my country will no longer exist. It's not my business who your vice president is, but if he is somebody who makes it less likely that World War III will begin in Europe, I've got to consider that quite a mighty positive. His negatives are exactly as you say. He was handpicked, given $15 million by Thiel to get into the Senate race in Ohio in the first place, and not for nothing. He didn't give him $15 million for no reason. He is in hoc to AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, to well over $1 million. He was critical of Trump, but not in a good way. The criticisms he made of Trump were about the things that Trump didn't or shouldn't have been criticized about. So he is indeed a creature of the WEF and other similar type of fronts, Bilderberg and the rest. So he's got positives and he's got negatives. I'm only glad he's not Nikki Haley. Last word to you, Will.
Yeah, I wondered what you might have thought. My favorite, of course, was Vivek Ramaswamy and his speech. He's always so eloquent. A lot of people don't trust him, but I hope we roll the dice next time and give him a shot. I love what he has to say. What do you think?
No, I'm not with you on that one. He's very eloquent. You're right. but so was Adolf Hitler. Thanks, Will, for the call. Colm in Dublin disagrees with Mohammed. Let's hear why. Go ahead, Colm.
How are you, George? It's great to talk to you.
Thank you.
I've seen three or four different presidents going back before George Bush even, and every time they come to Ireland or anywhere I've seen them, the Secret Service have come weeks in advance. I've been on with you before, Joe. I'm a former Republican prisoner, former member of the IRA.
Oh, yes.
Yes. And what happens is even when the Queen came here, I lived down by Guinness's in Dublin, and although I spent time in England in jail and in Ireland in Portlaoise prison, I'm well known, and the Gardaí and Special Branch would come out and they'd make sure they know where you are, the whole lot. So I find this completely, I'm not buying it at all. There's no way that I'm buying that this guy jumped up on a roof and took a shot at the former president. The last time Biden was here, we were actually stood on a road in Inchicore for nearly a half an hour waiting on him to go to the airport in a convoy in an armoured limousine. So, and this is in Ireland. I mean, who's going to be taking a shot at him in Ireland? Biden or anyone else? I mean, this is absolute. I'm not buying it at all, George.
I think that's very powerful. I think that's very powerful testimony. I mean, it's either or, as I put it to Jackson Hinkle. It's either the Secret Service or the Keystone Cops, Charlie Chaplin, in disguise. Either that, or they were in on the job. To me, these are the only two alternatives here. Either they are complete idiots, led by fools, staffed by fools, and disregarded the most elementary principles of security, some of which you have described there. And I heard Natalie on television last night talking about you're not allowed to stand on an overpass on the motorway, for example, when the president goes underneath that pass, because you cannot be allowed to be above the president. Now, Trump isn't the president, but he's only months away from being the president, and he was the president until 4 years ago. So you would have thought that he'd be entitled to and be being afforded absolutely blue chip, top of the range, state of the art protection from the Secret Service. Well, he either wasn't, and the catalogue of blunders and errors reaches Chaplin-esque Keystone Cops levels, or more likely, unless we think America's completely gone to the dogs, more likely that the deep state was involved in it. To me, these are the only two options here. Colm, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for your call. Stephen says, why is the YouTube chat going so aggro on some random dude called Mohammed? You all aren't tough just because George emboldened you all. Come on now, where's the fire in your politics? Well, when Mohammed says that I'm an extremist Christian who's getting ready to go to war with the Muslims because I feel so fondly towards Donald Trump, tends to get you angry. You feel me? Bustello Maserati said, Darani has no reason to dance for you. He is with us. Who is us, Bustello? Why don't you call Bustello? Why don't you come and have a go if you think you're hard enough? Come on, or you're a gutless coward. North Red says, Mohammed, were you on Trump's protection detail? Were you sacked? Are you bitter? Well, Hala is in Michigan, where the missus and I are coming sometime soon. Hope to meet you there, Hala. Welcome. Hala? Did she leave the telephone? We'll come back to her. Albert Veli says, go look up Peter Thiel instead. Hala, are you there?
I'm right here.
Go ahead. The world is waiting for you.
The world's waiting?
Thank you.
That's good. We're waiting for you. You know, I love your show, and I just want to talk to you. I don't know what we're going to vote for this election. I mean, the choice is disturbing. And I don't know what we're going to do so far. What I'm going to do. It's so pathetic. Yeah, you know, this is America. I mean, my God, we've come this, we've felt this low. It's unreal. You know, this is really mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Horrible.
You've got a more accomplished political class in Ouagadougou than you do in Washington, D.C. Very much so, in fact. Burkina Faso is a far better run place than the United States of America. And it's come to something when I can say that without anybody laughing. It is the truth. The political offer of Donald Trump and Joe Biden has to be breaking world records in farce. It's like, you're going to vote for Laurel or Hardy? Are you going to vote for Tom or Jerry? It is truly mind-boggling that that is the choice. But I'm backing the third choice, which is Dr. Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, who intellectually, culturally, socially, and above all politically and geopolitically is by far the best candidate in the race. But she doesn't get a look in, not on the debates, she's not on the television, and so on. But we have to stop voting for the lesser of two evils, Hala. And you don't want me to tell you who the lesser of the two evils between Biden and Trump is, because you might not like the answer. It's Biden. Last word to you, Hala.
I agree with you. After Palestine and what's going on there, I mean, there's no words that can describe this. This is such a black page in our history of the whole world.
Yeah.
I mean, but you know, things are going to change sooner or later. This is a wake-up call. Unfortunately, in America right now, most people don't know what's going on in Palestine, Israel. They don't know what's going on. They're busy going to work, busy watching their shows. Very few people are paying attention to political issues. You'd be surprised how ignorant people are about what's going on today in Palestine.
I wouldn't be surprised, and it's not that much better here. All I can say to cheer you up is, thanks to the internet and social media, the technological revolution we're living through, there are more people who are aware than there has ever been in human history. So although we are very far from being a majority, there are more of us than there have ever been. I can tell you that because I've been doing this a very long time. Now, in the past, you would not have been able to connect to me from Michigan. There would not be people listening to me from all over the world, as is evidenced by the callers tonight. And I would not be able to tell you, as I do for the second time, that Mrs. Galloway and I are coming to Michigan. Watch this space. Hala, thanks very much for your call. I hope to see you when we get there. Speaking of Gayatri, she's here. What's rattling, Gayatri?
We're asking, was Trump shooting a deep state inside job? And of course, we have for days now been looking at a classic narrative of a political assassination in the US. And as Margarita Simonyan said, it's like a TV series on repeat, without any sense of imagination.
It's like Dallas, for those old enough to remember it.
Kafil says, unpredictability and uncontrollability are risks. Therefore, Trump is risky for the deep state.
That's exactly the
So you describe him as a broken clock, right twice. That's still too risky for the deep state.
Yeah.
So obviously, therefore, there's loads and loads of response to the poll, conspiracy theories, or question marks, really.
But are there many people in this stance, in the position of Muhammad in California? Are there many people who think that actually this all never happened? That the police chief wasn't killed? that hole in his head isn't real, that hole in Trump's ear isn't real? Are there many people who actually think that he put a blood capsule from under his cap? I mean, are there people who think that on your social media?
Well, there are people who are arguing that Trump is part of the deep state. Yes. And
why'd they try and kill him then?
To make him more popular?
Dead.
Well, missing it. That's the whole point.
Missed by a whisker. Nobody could have calculated that.
Nobody could have. So that's why we have this email coming in from Kevin in Greece. He says, I noticed on a photograph of the bullet, or a slipstream of the bullet, which was miraculously captured on camera, that, the angle is quite wrong. It's not possible for it to have been shot from above. It's obviously showing a horizontal trajectory.
You're right.
So a lot of people are putting this question mark on this matter: sloping roof, and all.
The grassy knoll to the sloping roof.
This one is funny. This one is from another Kevin Broom. He says, George, I'm a 71-year-old, and to save money, my good wife trims my hair. And months ago, she managed to snip the top of my ear. I've never seen so much blood falling down my collar. So he's basically making the point, why were there only 2 crisp lines falling from Trump's
I never let my good wife cut my hair around my ears. I did actually during COVID.
During COVID, I did a good job. But then after COVID, I resigned. Let you in the hands of a proper barber.
Exactly. There's his ear. Look, that's not made up. I promise you.
Well, in terms of other question marks, Sean Babington says, following you being on the Ukrainian hit list, is Trump not on the hit list? Because the last thing Zelensky wants is Trump taking over the White House. Yeah, he's made it so clear.
Jackson made that point that if the Ukrainian state wants to kill me, imagine how much they'd like to kill Donald Trump, who is going to destroy everything for them, going to blow everything away and destroy all of them and bring the whole show to a crashing end. And the prosecution, there's me on the death list, the prosecution of all the people involved. I mean, they'll all go to jail for the rest of their lives. So there's a big Ukrainian interest in killing Trump, definitely. Whether the American friends of Ukraine, otherwise known as the Democrat, and the deep state that work for them, would be a better pick to do the job. Well, they failed, so maybe not.
So you know how we always have drones, wherever we can have permission to record some of our gatherings. Well, did you see any drones at that open air event? Asks Derek Mathias.
Good point.
And I want to read this one from Gordon Stiles, which is a very nice metaphor. I think it was an open door assassination. That's when you know the barn is surrounded by vicious, deadly animals wandering around, sniffing about, and there's a visitor in the barn who you don't really like and you want that. So you just leave a small door slightly open. A couple of wolves wander in the they wander in randomly one evening and enjoy a fresh meal. The Secret Service and the rest of the US know of thousands of wolves wandering around wanting to eat.
I think that's a good point. I've been saying there's only 2 alternatives, but in truth there are 3, and that is the third that you have introduced. Namely, that it's not that they're the Keystone Cops, neither is it the case that they themselves proactively tried to kill Trump, but by their incessant propaganda against him,
they will push someone towards it.
Descriptions of him as Hitler, as Stalin, as a Russian agent, as a traitor. I mean, if I had £1 for every time they've called him a traitor, I'd be rich. So they knew that they had generated such a hatred against Trump that someone like this boy might well come forward, and they, as your correspondent put it, left the farm door open. Good point.
Can I have one more, bringing it back to the UK where we had the King's Speech? Robin Hansman says, according to Google, in June 23, an internal JP Morgan report from 2019 filed to a New York court found that Jeffrey Epstein appears to maintain a particularly close relationship with Prince Andrew, Duke of York, and Lord Peter Mandelson, a senior member of the British government. Why hasn't this been raised by the British press?
Well, it's been raised by us incessantly, and I can't give you a reason why. That with Peter Mandelson on television almost every day,
as he is, yes,
that no one has ever said to him, what first attracted you to the child sex trafficker, Jeffrey Epstein?
Yeah.
Even when he was in prison, you were staying at his property in New York. Even when he was in prison, you were making telephone calls to him. Why has nobody ever asked
because
that?
That's the standard and level of the British media, the press, right? In cahoots.
Prostitution. I'll give you chips later. Was Trump shooting a deep state inside job? 30,366 of you voted. It was yes 88, 77, 82, 86. No 12, 23, 18, 14. The verdict is overwhelming. Albert Velli says, go look up Peter Thiel. Instead, he has a gigantic influence in both Silicon Valley and the Republican Party. Vance is his protege. I believe I did indeed refer to him, Albert. Last call then is from Kelly in North Carolina. Kelly, welcome.
Hi, George. And Gayatri, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, perfectly. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, I was having a good laugh at the way you were handling the guy, I believe Muhammad from California. I mean, it's something, I've dealt with and many of us have dealt with for years, that we have to, clarify everything we say with, we're not Trump supporters. And the mental gymnastics that people go through to find a way to accuse you of that when you're just stating facts is just amazing. But I wondered, had you, I missed part of the show, so have you gone into the BlackRock video at all, that this kid, the shooter, was part of this BlackRock commercial?
It has been mentioned, but feel free to give us further particulars if you would.
Well, I mean, I don't know much other than they were at his high school, and when he was still a student, so I don't know, 3 years ago or so. And the crazy thing was, I saw a still of that video used in an ABC News report, but they failed to mention where they got it. So it's just another interesting twist. Like maybe that's an initial point of contact if this was in fact an inside job.
It's a very good point. He was indeed in a BlackRock commercial, and now he isn't. But the still that you refer to is from that BlackRock television commercial. It's curiouser and curiouser. What can we say? It's not conclusive in any way. Doesn't mean that BlackRock are necessarily involved in the crime. But BlackRock are deeply involved in Ukraine and stand to lose many, many billions of dollars of revenue and profit if the war in Ukraine is brought to an end on disadvantageous terms for the Zelensky regime. If Zelensky is drummed out of office by his own people, encouraged by an incoming Trump administration, BlackRock will be very, very big losers indeed. But that doesn't mean, that's circumstantial, it doesn't mean that they were involved. People say, and it's been said twice tonight, let's wait for the investigation. But who's doing the investigation? Who will guard the guards? The people who are doing the investigation are the people who should be being investigated. This is the problem that we have over and over again in relation to the deep state, and not just in America, Kelly, but in Britain and no doubt in other Western countries too. The investigators have entirely lost credibility. Last word to you, Kelly.
Well, I'm just really curious about the chain of command in the Secret Service, and I imagine that's secret. We don't get to know that. But this Cheadle woman at the top, I mean, is there some way the public can know what was that chain of command? Who are the people that could have been involved? But I imagine we'll never know.
Well, you know who should be investigating it is the Fourth Estate. It's a free and untrammeled press that should be investigating it. But we know that the press is now virtually entirely subverted, wholly owned subsidiary of the power that they're supposed to be holding to account. You know who would have been a great investigator of it? A cat called Julian Assange. If Julian was still at the height of his powers and free to do so, I think he'd get to the bottom of it all rather quickly indeed, which is the reason they tried to kill him too. Kelly in North Carolina, thank you for the call. It is indeed the last call of the evening, and it falls to me only to commend to you the show last Sunday, which is breaking new records in terms of views. If you missed last Sunday, you must watch it again. And then you can take a look at my live stream of the fight back in Rochdale on Monday. You can look at my show, Have It Out with Galloway, which is already up on the internet now. But thanks for joining us here on the Mother of All Talk Shows this evening, and God willing, I'll see you again next Sunday at the same time in the same place. I don't know if there are time changes going on, but just always look for the UK time and work backwards to wherever you are in the world. It's been marvellous. Thanks for joining me. Good night.